Emma pulled her worn coat tighter around her shoulders as she stepped into the lavish restaurant, the golden chandeliers casting a warm glow that only made her feel more out of place. The scent of roasted meats, rich sauces, and freshly baked bread made her empty stomach twist with longing, but her heart thumped nervously in her chest. She had saved for weeks from her bookstore wages, cutting corners on meals and skipping little comforts, just to afford this one dinner, a small escape from her struggles and a way to remind herself she was still allowed to dream. The host at the entrance gave her a quick glance, clearly unimpressed by her simple dress, but gestured toward the back where the cheaper tables were. Emma nodded shyly, her eyes darting across the room, dazzled by the sparkling glasses, polished silverware, and the elegant people in suits and gowns. Then, without thinking, she drifted toward a beautifully set table near the center, its velvet chairs and flawless white linen calling to her. She thought it might be hers, and nervously sat down, hoping not to draw attention. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the menu, realizing every dish cost more than she had planned, but she told herself it would be worth it, just this once. As she tried to calm her nerves, a hush fell over the restaurant. Emma looked up and felt her breath catch. A tall man in a perfectly tailored black suit was striding toward her, his sharp gaze focused on the very seat she had taken. Whispers spread like wildfire through the room, waiters straightening instantly as though a king had entered. Emma froze, panic rising in her chest. This wasn't just any table, she had sat at the wrong one. The man stopped directly in front of her, his piercing eyes making her want to shrink into her seat. He was Alexander Reid, the CEO whose face often appeared on magazine covers, a man of immense wealth and power. Emma's lips parted, an apology trembling at the edge of her tongue, but she couldn't form the words. In that moment, she wanted to disappear, but she was trapped by his gaze, realizing her small act of sitting down had thrown her into the path of someone who could change her life forever. Emma's pulse raced as she scrambled to rise from the chair, her voice stumbling out in fragments of apology, but before she could gather herself, Alexander Reid's hand lifted in a calm yet commanding gesture that froze her in place. His deep voice cut through the tension of the room as he said just one word, "Stay." It wasn't a request but an order that somehow carried warmth beneath its authority. Emma blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly, while waiters exchanged nervous glances, clearly expecting him to demand her removal. Instead, he lowered himself into the chair across from her with effortless grace, as though her presence at his reserved table was no inconvenience at all. "You looked like you belonged here," he said quietly, studying her with eyes that seemed to see far more than her plain dress or trembling hands. Emma's cheeks flushed hot with embarrassment, and she wanted to insist she didn't belong, that this wasn't her table, but the weight of his gaze silenced her. When the waiter approached, Alexander ordered without hesitation, 2 glasses of wine, the chef's special appetizers, and entrees that Emma could never dream of affording. She tried to protest, whispering that she couldn't let him do that, but just then her stomach betrayed her with a loud, unladylike growl. The sound hung in the air, mortifying her, until Alexander chuckled softly, a hint of amusement softening his otherwise stern expression. "Then it's settled," he said, as if her hunger alone had sealed the arrangement. As the food arrived, Emma found herself drawn into conversation she hadn't expected. Alexander asked about her life, not with idle curiosity, but with genuine interest, listening carefully as she hesitantly spoke about juggling 3 jobs, her dream of finishing school, and the endless nights spent caring for her ailing mother. Each word felt like peeling back a layer of herself she normally hid, yet his attention was steady, his expression thoughtful, as though her story mattered in a world where she often felt invisible. For the first time in years, Emma's heart warmed under the weight of someone's undivided care, and though the luxurious dishes on the table dazzled her, it was the simple act of being seen that filled her more than anything else. The days that followed unfolded like a dream Emma wasn't sure she deserved, each moment with Alexander pulling her deeper into a world she had only ever seen from the outside. He began inviting her to dinners that shimmered with chandeliers and conversations filled with power, introducing her as though she belonged at his side, never once letting her feel like an outsider. At first, she resisted, afraid people would see through her simple dresses and calloused hands, afraid they would realize she came from nights of counting coins for bus fare and mornings of rushing between jobs. But Alexander never looked at her that way. His gaze carried respect, curiosity, and a surprising gentleness that steadied her nerves. He even brought her to his penthouse one evening, not to impress her with its glass walls and breathtaking view of the skyline, but simply to sit with her on the couch, sharing stories about his late parents, his rise in business, and the loneliness that success could never quite erase. Emma listened, touched by his honesty, and for once, she allowed herself to believe she wasn't just a guest in his life, she was someone he truly wanted there. Yet not everyone welcomed her presence. She noticed the sideways glances at events, the whispers when they walked into a room together, the way some executives at his company sneered, calling her a distraction or worse. One night, while Alexander was occupied in a meeting, Emma slipped into the corridor and overheard two well-dressed men laughing at her expense, mocking her background and calling her the charity case he picked up for amusement. The words sliced through her heart, burning her with shame she thought she had left behind. Though Alexander's kindness had built a fragile cocoon around her, in that moment, the truth she had always feared came rushing back. She didn't belong in his world, no matter how much he tried to convince her otherwise. That night, with tears she refused to let fall, Emma made a decision she thought would protect them both. She scribbled a brief note thanking him for everything but insisting she couldn't stay, then quietly disappeared from his life, returning to her small apartment, her bookstore shifts, and her mother's bedside. On the outside, her life looked unchanged, but inside, she carried a hollow ache, knowing she had walked away from the one person who had ever made her feel truly seen. Alexander noticed Emma's absence like a missing heartbeat, and as the days stretched into a week without her presence, an unsettling hollowness grew inside him, a silence louder than the busiest boardroom. He searched for her with a determination that startled even himself, dismissing meetings, ignoring social obligations, until finally he traced her to the modest bookstore where she worked, the place she had once shyly described to him. The bell above the door jingled as he entered, his tailored suit and commanding presence drawing curious glances from customers, but his eyes locked only on her, standing behind the counter, her expression frozen in disbelief. He strode across the room, the note she had left clenched in his hand, its words etched into his mind, "Thank you for letting me glimpse your world, but I don't belong there." He placed it gently on the counter before her and said, his voice low but unyielding, "You think you don't belong with me?" Emma's throat tightened, her eyes lowering in shame, unable to meet the intensity of his gaze. "I didn't want to hurt you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "People talk, Alexander, they see me as nothing but a burden, a charity case. I don't want to ruin your name." He exhaled, not in anger but in frustration at the walls she had built around herself. With unexpected tenderness, he reached across the counter and lifted her chin, forcing her eyes to meet his. "Emma, from the moment you sat at that table, nothing else has mattered. Not the whispers, not the stares, only you. You changed everything for me." The sincerity in his voice cracked the armor around her heart, tears brimming in her eyes as the bookstore grew still, every customer holding their breath. "I don't care about status, or rumors, or the world's shallow judgments," he continued, his hand steady on hers. "I care about the woman who works 3 jobs and still smiles at her mother, who sat at the wrong table but somehow made it the right one. I care about you." Overwhelmed, Emma let her tears fall, her lips trembling as if to protest, but his arms pulled her gently across the counter into an embrace that erased every doubt. "Stay," he whispered against her hair, his voice breaking with emotion. "Not just at my table, but in my life." And in that moment, surrounded by the scent of old books and the stunned silence of strangers, Emma realized she had never chosen the wrong table at all, she had simply chosen the one where she was always meant to be.